What are some stereotypes about women in the workforce today?
Some stereotypes of the women in the workforce is that their jobs that they do usually have to do with personal care or nursing assistants or cooks or like things that have to do with education, and they're less likely to work in science, technology, or engineering and math occupations like men. And maybe a reason for it is because like women have families and things, so it's harder for them to travel or to be late in the office like the men.
I'm in the kitchen, and I'm whipping. Hey! Seasoning that chicken. Hey! Take a lick. Hey!
You a pie.
Oh boy, what's like?
Nurse.
Here,
Hatch.
take your pills.
Thanks, buddy.
Teacher.
2 + 2 = 4.
Veterinarian.
Hairdresser.
Next question.
So what are some occupations that women have today that go against the cultural norms of our society?
Studies found that nearly 1/4 of new jobs that are usually male-dominant occupations like CEOs, lawyers, or surgeons, they were filled by a woman between the years of 2009 through 2017. So that shows an increase of women taking over male-dominated jobs. And it's also in reverse, the males are also doing that, and currently 27% of all the female occupations like education administrators or cooks are also now held by male workers. Some of the top male jobs, they're male dominated, women are working now. So the percentages of those are the lawyers are now 48% of women working, sales manager 43% of women, 9 chemists 42%, and firefighters 32%, and chief executive 28%. And those are usually male-dominated jobs, so that's showing how the women are taking over, and now they're able to work those jobs.
Chemist.
Firefighter. Police officer. Army girl. Hardware girl.
How do women show deviance against society's opinions and stereotypes against them in their workforce?
Show deviance by taking the jobs that are usually seen as more male-dominated, and they take those jobs and they do well on them. What are some cultural norms of the women working in the 1920s?
Some of the cultural norms for women in the 1920s were that they stayed at home with their kids mostly, and there was a lot of resistance of them going into the workforce because they were going to be doing the jobs that were seen as men's work, and they were only really allowed to do jobs that were deemed safe for women.
What are some cultural changes pertaining to women in the workforce over the years?
Some of the cultural changes that happened throughout the years were that women went into more of the jobs that were occupied by men because the men had to go off into war. So they took over the jobs in like the factories, and they didn't stay at home with the kids as much.
How is deviance expressed in the 1920s society, and how do they react to it?
The society reacted to the women's deviance by, they saw it as a blessing in disguise because they needed people to keep on working in the factories and keep the country and the economy going.
Was there any social conflict between the men and the women after the women started getting more jobs?
Googie. 911. Anyone? 911.
There were a lot of conflicts between men and women in the workforce because the women started to have a movement against their employers about their wages, because even though they were doing the same things as the men's were doing in their jobs, they still got paid less, and a lot of them refused to be paid with a lower wage than what the men got.
And why are these social conflicts important?
These conflicts are important because if women did not go into the workforce, they wouldn't have paved so many more options for us to choose for our careers today.
How is the structural functional paradigm reflected in the time of the working woman?
It is represented by a lot of women had to take over the phone operators because more people found women's voices more calming and soothing. And during World War I, which is in the 1920s, there were more medical field options for the women to go into, especially nurses, because they were very common in the workforce for women, but female doctors were very rare.
What were some biased opinions against women in the workforce?
So some of the biased opinions about women going into the workforce were that they were only really allowed to do jobs that were seemed safe and not as manly and not as hardworking, such as telephone operators, because they had a more smoothing voice for the phone. Plus, they didn't have to do as much work as the men did, and they could get paid less because they weren't doing as much work or hard labor as the men were.
What did you learn?
For me, learning personally from this project, I learned that we need to embrace all the opportunities that we have, and we need to educate more people about how there was a lot of gender inequality between women and men in the workforce, and back then and even now today. So I would like to go around and go educate more people and tell them about what we learned about the inequalities and about the structural functional paradigm and everything else that we learned about, and compare it to our topic and let people know that we need to change all these things.